God's in control. And that's the reminder. Again, we do what we do for him always. Well, in an audacious display of teamwork, 58 Indian Army Service Corps soldiers set a world record when they collectively rode a motorcycle over 3/4 of a mile. On an Air Force runway, the driver piloted a Royal Enfield motorcycle, specially engineered with a platform to accommodate Major Sharma and his platoon, bedecked in the national colors. Nicknamed the Tornadoes, this stunt group is internationally known for their feats of daring. They currently hold 19 international and national records. The combination of balance, coordination, and cohesion for such an endeavor does not come easily. Only after twice attempting it and wiping out in spectacular fashion did they make a third attempt that was successful. Now, several things amaze me about this feat. The first one is this: where do you find 58 guys who say, like, yeah, I want to all get on a motorcycle that has no way of stopping other than a controlled crash? I mean, best case scenario, you're going to crash no matter what. And on top of that, where do you find a motorcycle? I calculated if the guys weighed 140 pounds each, which is very light for a guy, they would still be over 8,000 pounds with the guys alone, not to mention the platform that they're standing on. Where do you find a motorcycle that can handle that? And they have to keep the weight balanced. You can see the one, they don't all start on it together. They can't start from a dead stop and go. So they have to run and kind of jump on, and you have to keep it balanced while you're doing that. I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of crazy. It's one of those kind of things where, like, why? Okay, you set a world record, like why? I don't really understand, but, people do that. Well, the Tornadoes could not set world records if they did not have an incredible amount of unity and precision. Now, of course, these guys are part of the Indian Army, and in militaries, you must work together. No army can be successful without teamwork and unity. And the same is true of the church. If we're not careful, it's easy to forget the priority that Scripture places on unity. We sometimes get sidetracked with our pet theology, like who will be left behind and when will it happen, or any number of secondary issues. Meanwhile, God makes it clear He wants us to get along and to be unified and to love each other. Doing so is foundational to our faith. The Apostle Paul wrote a letter to Christians who were living in what is modern-day Turkey. They were suffering all kinds of trials. Slaves were suffering at the hands of their masters. The people were suffering under a government that hated Christianity and killed the believers. They also had people in their communities who disliked them because of their faith. The primary theme of our epistle is how to deal with suffering, and yet in the middle of the book, Peter talks about how to experience the good life by loving others. This morning we're going to be looking at 1 Peter chapter 3, beginning in verse 8. I want to note we're skipping the first 7 verses of 1 Peter. It's dealing with husbands and wives, and I recently had given a sermon on marriage and husbands and wives. It's very similar, a lot of the same language. And some of you would have just been going like, didn't Mark just say this recently? And the answer would have been yes. So we're going to move on to verse 8, where we read this. Finally, all of you, he says, be like-minded. Be sympathetic. Love one another. Be compassionate and humble. Now, at the end of chapter 2, which we looked at last week, Peter was speaking to slaves. In the first 7 verses, he's speaking to husbands and wives. So this did not apply to everybody. But now he's saying, finally, all of you. In other words, hey, this is for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. And he says, be like-minded. Now, it's the only time in the New Testament that this particular Greek word is used. And what is translated as 2 words in English, like-minded, is actually 1 word in the Greek. And it literally means one-minded. So Peter wants his readers to think alike. Not in the sense of holding identical opinions, but by being agreeable and sensitive to each other's concerns. Paul in Philippians said something very similar when he said, make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. So the importance of unity in the church cannot be underestimated. We're called to care about each other. We're called to love each other. Why? Because if we don't love each other, the world is not going to want what we have. If they see disunity, if they see hostility within the church, they're never going to want to experience the love that Christ has. And often churches have been known for not being places where the people get along, where they care about each other. Several years ago, I spoke to some families from our church. We had 2 families who moved right about the same time, and it was a couple months later, and I happened to speak to both the families in the same week. And I'd ask them, how's your church hunt going? And they both said the same thing. We have found some churches where we liked the service and it was nice, but we've struggled to find a church where the people seem to really love and to care, where someone will even say hi to us. You see, people come in and they're waiting to see, is there love here? They might like the sermon, they might not. They might like the worship, they might not. But if they sense true love, that often will draw them in spite of everything else. Now, if we're going to love newcomers, we must love one another first. And there are few things more heart-wrenching than congregations that have allowed themselves to become divided into warring factions. Often the problem starts on a small level, something insignificant, but they become a keg of dynamite that can destroy the church. We are not going to agree on everything. I mean, some of you are Giants fans. We are not. I'm a Cowboys fan. We are never going to agree. You're Eagles fans. We are never going to agree. We don't like each other because of that. Some of you are Jets fans, and none of the rest of us really care about you. You're really inconsequential, except for my wife, who she's amazing, and she's wonderful, and except for you, honey. Well, the reality is we all have differing opinions. We all have things we like and that we dislike, and that's perfectly fine. Peter is not saying that we need to agree on everything. He's calling for unity, not uniformity.